Welcome to Prime Suspects, alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr. I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics: a mid-tournament look at March Madness, Sportradar's acquisition of IMG Arena from Endeavor and what it means for the data ecosystem, and a high-level look at sweepstakes, prediction markets, and the loophole-driven economy within sports betting. Kicking it off, as always, with the latest from inside Prime Sports. Adam, last week you mentioned the biggest need as of our recording was Maryland over Grand Canyon University. Still not entirely sure how you got into that situation, but the Terps won by 32, comfortably covering as 10-point favorites. How was the rest of round one for the book?
We actually had a decent week. For as chalky as it was, I think across the board, it was a winning week. Nothing special, nothing major, whatnot. The volume was probably a little less than I expected. I thought there'd be a bit more, but definitely I will note that live action this year on the tournament is up. Like, the pre-game action is definitely not feeling it like I've seen in previous years, but the live, once you turn that button, click on the live, it's just, the ticket just runs. I think it's really showing where the ecosystem of the entire industry is going on the sports, of the live betting starting to get its traction. A lot of people just realize they don't need to bet pre-game anymore because they have, many opportunities throughout the game to find a spot when they want to get into and when they want to get out of, with cash outs or hedging or anything like that as well.
And with pregame betting being down, I'm guessing that might have been especially magnified for round two. I recall your advice last week being that there was an opportunity for bettors to capitalize on the quick turnaround between games, but maybe because of the quick turnaround, not as much time, perhaps not as much interest for bettors to get down prior to tip-off. Although it seemed like there was an opportunity to tap into a less efficient betting market, especially with some of the opening lines. All that considered, Adam, how did Prime's bettors fare in round two of the tournament?
Round two, it's weekend. I think you get the Thursday, Friday weekend, you get your, general watchers, people that might be hesitant going into that first round. You get more action in round two. Less games, but per game, the numbers are up. From watching those games on Thursday, Friday, there was definitely some opportunities Saturday, Sunday to find some spots. You could really see which teams were just classes above, and then which teams had sort of, had hard first round games or big upsets. And then that's their tournament glory, of some of these big upsets, and then they get into round two and they get slashed. It's, the weekend played out as generally a weekend was expected. Again, chalky in times. I know I was on lots of underdogs and we needed lots of underdogs in certain spots, but there was a lot of swings back and forth in these games as well. Gonzaga was one of my big plays in the Calcutta. They almost come back, and that last possession was kind of sad in the end after that big run they made. But all in all, I think it was a good weekend of basketball.
You mentioned the Bet the Process Calcutta briefly on last week's episode. It generated some interest on Twitter, and I'd be curious as to any overview you can provide, giving us a bit more of a peek behind the curtain on how it works, who's in it, and the portfolio with which you came away.
So it was very close, going to be a no-show. The numbers, I were trying to get at least 5 people. It ended up 4. At one point it was 3. And then I put my hand up seeing who was participating, because there was another player in there that I don't mind going up against. I'm the fish in most of these scenarios on these Calcuttas. You have the best of the best bettors that have their models, they have their machines. Some sports they're better than others. But this was pretty much 2 pros against 2 squares that participated in this one. It wasn't done live, it was just done privately. Rufus participated, myself, and a couple others. I went in doing very little homework. I went in Xing out some teams that I had zero interest in bidding, the 1 seeds, things like that. The only 1 seed I was probably interested in was Duke. From everything I was seeing and reading, it just looks like they're the clear best team in the tournament. It ended up running up to a number that I wasn't interested in participating in. I'd picked probably 8 to 10 teams that I expected to go for low prices. That's my goal, is to get broad spread, low per participant cost, and spend about 10% of the pot, which I think I spent about 9.8% of the pot in the end, and had 16 teams, including 2 sets of 4 with the 13 to 16 seeds in 2 of the brackets. So I had a, slate across. Gonzaga was my overspend. I went in there wanting them. Definitely went a little hard on that. But there was a situation where I went in wanting North Carolina. They went for a little high price, and then I ended up with Ole Miss. So some things work out, some things don't. Right now, I've got a 6% return with Ole Miss and BYU live, and they're both worth, I think it's 2.25 or 2.75% of the pot. The pot was 492,000. So if I can kind of get those two over, I'm good to go. If I can at least get one of them through, I'm almost break square, and then, I can play it from there.
I heard you mention North Carolina being a team that piqued your interest, and that triggered a recall to last week's episode. I think you mentioned North Carolina had some pretty big futures exposure for you guys. When you're approaching the Calcutta, is there any thought as to what you already need on your side of the counter, or is it kind of a church and state separation as far as that dynamic is concerned?
I take a little bit of the information of who bet it, and then obviously a value of what the team's going to cost and what their pathway looks like and things like that. I'm a little less, as we know, don't really look at my bottom line or what my risk profile, etc. is. I'm just all in. So in that spot, I'd seen certain players play North Carolina at 300 to 1 plus. So going in there and then trying to pick them up for a small price. But I think generally a lot of people, sharps across the board, had seen them as a team that could potentially go deep, and they fell at the first hurdle, which quite often happens when some teams sort of get heaters and big crowds wanting them, and then they lay an egg.
Well, with that, we will go ahead and pivot into our water cooler segment. We'll bring Joe into the fold here. Our topic this week for the water cooler, Sportico, breaking news last week that Sportradar would acquire IMG Arena from Endeavor, giving Sportradar official data for 70 rights holders across 14 sports, including tennis Grand Slam events, Major League Soccer, the PGA Tour, UFC, and more. Joe, what do you think about the specifics of this deal? And more broadly, what impact does it have on the data ecosystem for various stakeholders, including bookmakers that need to power their products?
Well, one, I was really amused by Sportico's headline, since usually when you acquire something, when you are the acquirer, you're actually buying something. And this was more like, Endeavor, IMG Arena saying, hey, can you take over the car payments on my shitty car over here? I'll pay you $125 million on top of it to do it. So if that's what acquiring something is in this space, I am open for those kind of acquisitions today, everybody. And you will not have to pay me. I'll give you a 50% discount on the $125 million. I mean, what does this say? This says that, these deals that were cut right after PASPA was overturned, when, there was a lot of frothiness in the industry, big time gold rush, people really overestimated what they should be paying for official data. Official data is not valuable until we give it value at the sports books. So I think that as far as that's concerned, like, these guys are just the highest profile victims, I would say, of this. You may see a kind of reset on this as going forward, because, you look at some of the other deals that are sitting out there, like Genius Sports, they 5x'd what Sportradar was paying as the official data supplier for the NFL when they, swipe that contract. That's just simply unsustainable. And, they had to give up a chunk of their company to the NFL in order to get the deal. Well, now you've got a shrinking market. You have fewer sports books today in America than you had a few years ago. Although who knows, maybe they're sending out their crack sales teams to Kalshi, Crypto.com, Robinhood, and all of the, to ProfitX and everybody else who's using alternate models to the marketplace. So who knows, maybe there's life for them yet. But I would say not. They overestimated what they could get for their official data. The leagues overestimated what they, the way they valued their official data as well. And I think this is just gravity pulling everybody back down to earth.
Kind of headlined the topic that I was going to come at as well. Like, an acquisition seems like when you're buying something. So, I mean, I'm obviously heavily involved in this space in a sense of I've dealt with BetRadar for now 11 years, Genius for I think 6 or 7, IMG for probably 7 or 8, Perform. There's a few other smaller ones out there. it's always, and we've always said it's a race to the bottom on these data rights and the streaming and all that stuff. We're really seeing streaming is just going away, even in Latin America and these places where, there was a thirst or a hunger for it and lots of places were putting it up. A lot of them now are just removing it. People are finding ways to watch these games. It's becoming a lot more available, so you don't need to put it on your site. So then there's less real estate taken up by the streaming, which then can be more product, casino games and things like that. IMG had kind of given up some years ago. They lost the WTA tennis to Perform. Then they lost the ATP to Radar. They really weren't out there getting new ones. Now, granted, they built a PGA Tour product. It's actually a very, very good product. They were just overcharging for it. So hopefully BetRadar get that in their hands, and now it's a bit more realistic. And if it is, it's a product that I've always said I'd like to plug in on the live side. The UFC data, again, it's, they've always tried to sell it as a high value product. UFC Live is better for the bettors than the bookies. And I don't know how using the data, because judges aren't using the data. So the judges don't really judge these things on the data aspect as well. MLS is obviously a good product. And in the US, it's, for US books and I think LATAM books, it's a top 4 soccer league. So they pick up something there. But you could clearly see IMG had quit this business some time ago, very, very hard. And they saw that it was something they want to get out of and ultimately paid someone to take it off their hands. So, the 70 right holders across 14 sports, they had some Kazakhstan basketball and some really low-end things that we just stopped really using. And now Radar's kind of got everything. What does that mean for the industry and the bookmakers? Somewhat of a monopoly, which is not a good thing because they want to just run up these prices because of the stupidity in the beginning of what they did with these leagues across the board, not just NFL, NBA, NHL. They've done this with tennis. They've done this with soccer leagues all across the globe. And it's becoming more expensive to scout like they used to. So now they're doing it from TV. So now there's latency on the data. And it's just becoming really products that are unusable to some extent as well for particularly us that wants to invite everybody in. And now you're fighting people courtsiding in stadiums or getting quicker feeds from in-stadium vision and things like that. So kind of knew about this deal a year ago. From what I understand, it was a tough one to get over the line for everybody involved. But it's done now, and now there's a transition period, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, 2 things as a follow-up to what Adam was saying. Like regarding the scouting, I find it interesting. Sportradar, at least through the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournaments, both men's and women's, they don't have scouts in the stands. They're doing it from in studio, which basketball's too fast a game to be doing it from in studio. The latency is just shit.
And it clearly showed up on their product,
right?
Versus an in-stadium product that's out there.
The thing that Sportradar has that they're going to run up against is hardly any markets in the United States, at least state markets, are requiring their operators to use official data. Like, was it Tennessee and maybe one other? I don't know. We're not in them. And so in a hammer and anvil strategy, they're missing one of those. And it's going to be tough. Now, will they start trundling off and trying to get states to adopt or push using official data under the guise of integrity or whatever it may be? And maybe they'll be finding other people standing there, maybe me, saying there's no need to do it. And there's other people who are out there who are being more aggressive about doing it right, doing it well all the time. There's all sorts of alternatives that are starting to, pop up to those guys. So the other thing I think where Sportradar has a problem, and maybe this is something, and I've said this a couple of times here on the show, is sports data is something that you could see just being a throw in to the packages that right now Amazon, Netflix, the other on-demand services, they're trying to bid for NFL rights and other pro league rights. You could see them just absolutely just oh yeah, throw it in there and, we'll give you a higher price. They have far more cash on hand in order to be able to, pay for those rights and pay a premium for them than what Sportradar does. So I don't know that Sportradar necessarily got a good thing in return. If somebody is paying you $125 million to take something away from you, if I paid you, Matt, $125 million to take my car off my hands, would you really get behind the wheel I'd be afraid. Okay. And I don't know, the guys who are behind Endeavor, I'm not going to say, I like the IMG guys. I really appreciate it over the years, meeting with them, talking with them. They're a fun group of guys to go out to dinner with in London. But the guys at Endeavor, they're not idiots. Okay. They ran away from this business. They did this at the same time that they were personally underwriting a management takeover of OpenBet. I guess we're going to call it like the IBM platform of sports betting. So they're discerning when it comes to, they're not getting out of sports betting wholesale, but they're definitely picking and choosing. And when you got management ponying up $450 million to take over OpenBet, at the same time, they're paying $125 million out of their pocket to Sportradar to take the sports data off their hands. I don't know. What's the part of the business that you want to be in?
Yeah, Joe, to your second point, it reminds me of the scene portrayed in Moneyball where Billy Beane is talking to David Justice and trying to bring him to reality and say, hey, the Yankees are paying you millions of dollars to play for another team. So
to play against them this year. That's such a brilliant scene.
Always an interesting dynamic when something like that is involved. And to your first point, I heard you mention that it was clear that Sportradar didn't have anybody in the arena throughout the tournament. And Adam, you jumped in and said that that was reflected in what you were seeing. I'm curious, bringing my USC bias to this one more time here. Juju Watkins going down last night early in the game. I'd imagine a player like that not handicapping women's college basketball seriously in any way, but that's got to be a very meaningful moment. And if somebody's not in the arena when something like that happens, Adam, do you see that get reflected in the live action, especially since live is becoming a bigger and bigger part of what you're seeing in tournaments like this?
So that's where the difference between the data and the bookmaking comes in a little bit. So on the data side, they're seeing that on TV, they're seeing that wherever, whether they're in stadium. The variance is, and I didn't see what happened, but you see, whether it's behind the scenes or off to the side of the court or in that's an additional side of the information where there is people that have, people within the stadiums, not collecting data, but collecting information like that as well. And depending how well for a bet radar, there's no chance you would get the data that you really need from that aspect out of them scouting that in stadium or at home on TV. On the flip side, there's others that are doing the data in stadium that you're getting some of those updates and injury things and that as well. So that's where it becomes a real relationship, partnership of being able to get the data, but also have that communication lines with who's collecting the data and what else they're seeing within stadiums. Because you may see, it quite often happens where you're watching a game, you see sort of someone get a niggle or whatnot, and then they go to the bench. But what you don't see is them go back to the locker room or things like that. And that might come on after an ad break or different things like that. So that's still where there's some significant value of being in stadium, collecting the data again, because all the TV, especially American TV, there is some latency. You do have some in-stadium vision that is a little lower latency, but every second is worth something in this business, especially for us that's trying to take every sharp player and everybody that wants to place a bet in that manner. And they're all out there trying to beat you any way possible, cheat, fight, anything like that. There's just people that are at that level where if you're going to compete with them, you need to have the best information as possible, getting to you as quickly as possible. And that's where you could see at certain times the latency between the two data providers.
Got it. I appreciate that distinction between the quantitative side that data providers are tasked with and the more qualitative side, trying to be quick to information. As you share that, I can't help but think about last year's Super Bowl, your MVP pick on the Super Stream, Dre Greenlaw, suffering a freak injury, taking the field after a punt. And we saw that coming out of a commercial break, but had somebody caught it in real time. Maybe there is a moment to say, hey, Travis Kelce might wake up and go off as he did in that game. So always a fascinating component as this ecosystem continues to evolve. Guys, I want to work in our look ahead segment to wrap up this week's episode. It seems like just about every day at this point, we're seeing news on sweepstakes or prediction market style products. And if we zoom out a bit, it shines a light on the reality that these platforms are operating through regulatory loopholes. Alfonso Straffen shared some relevant thoughts on this topic on Twitter late last week. So jump ball to the two of you. What do you think about the loophole-driven economy within sports betting and what it means for the future of regulated operators?
So for me, I've got 2 points on this one. One, license it all, legalize it all, tax it all. I was thinking on the way into the office this morning, it was probably 24 years ago when I first got this side of the world. And I think it was post 9/11, America's in wars and whatnot. And I was like, why don't they just tax it? They can go and, help them pay for these other events that they're in, etc., like that. On the other side, and I was actually going to post something over the weekend, we've seen multiple headlines in the last week about Fliff just closing accounts, disappearing accounts, not paying people. We've seen for a few months now. If this was offshore sportsbook and these headlines were coming up, the AGA and all these hypocritic motherfuckers in this industry would be all over this shit. Like the people that come out, and we're in New York a week ago, them talking about sweepstakes and this and the future and what's it doing and all these kind of things. It's just insane to see these things happening and people speaking out both sides of their mouth about this gray market or black market that is in their backyard. And there is no consumer protection. There is no anything. So get your shit together, license it all, make it affordable for businesses to enter in, make it safe for players to play in, and that's it. Simple as that. Now, I'm sure Joe will be a lot nicer and a lot more etiquette involved and actually lay this out how it probably should be laid out.
With a setup like that, I feel like just tearing off a string of F-bombs here and going full Australian on this. And why do I got to be the sensible one? But I'll be the sensible one. Look, what you have here is a collision of a 21st century technology market with consumer demand that's colliding headlong into a regulatory environment that was crafted largely. I mean, if we set aside Nevada, which has been doing gaming now legally for, 3/4 of a century or whatever it may be, specifically at New Jersey, because they were the first non-Nevada state. New Jersey is operating off of a regulatory foundation that was developed in the 70s to keep the Philadelphia mob out of Atlantic City. Okay, noble goal. The Philadelphia mob is almost non-existent right now. So that mission accomplished. But when you look at, the way, not only the foundation, but also the resourcing, a lot of times it's really fun to sit here and punch up on the regulators. But the regulators will tell you, hey, look, we don't have the resources to do this. We're still operating with the same level of resources that we had when we were just doing brick and mortar casinos. At that New York show that Adam just mentioned that we were all at a couple of weeks ago, I was on a panel with a nice regulator from Louisiana. And after I got finished, my own version of holding the lawmakers and regulators accountable, I said, I don't want to be insulting to anybody. And she said, I'm not insulted, Joe, because recently we were going through our regs and I was, taking note of the fact that they were telling us what the pixel count or pixel density had to be on our black and white security camera films and, the type of VCR quality systems that they had to use for backing up the cameras. Are you kidding me? Really? But you see that time and again when you go to different states. This is what they're dealing with. Is the lawmakers are really good about throwing something on their plate. All right, now online sports betting, online casino, whatever it may be. But there's never any follow-up and and by the way, we're going to augment your budget by an additional $1 million, $2 million a year for people who specialize in technology and people who specialize in these systems and everything. And it's really great to say okay, well, we'll all outsource it to GLI, little plug for our friend Joe Tall over there. But that's not an efficient process either, right? And so all of this is colliding at the same time where you got this massive consumer demand for on-demand gaming. They don't want to get there's a certain segment of the population, largely under the age of 35, doesn't feel like sticking their ass in a car because none of them own one. They all Uber, right? Like my kids. Why buy a car when they can charge dad $50 a pop when they want to drive somewhere? They don't want to Uber down to the local brick and mortar casino in order to play a couple of games for a couple of minutes, 5-10 minutes, casual gaming. And so this is where the lawmakers, the states, the regulators all have to kind of find their way to start keeping pace with the age here right now. Because at the same time, to your original point, Matt, about exploiting loopholes. Yes, absolutely. We've gone from let's all get down on our knees, with the proper process, is like the good Catholic that I am, in front of the lawmakers, in front of the regulators, and go through the very long licensing process, to make sure that I'm not a member of the Philadelphia Mafia and that I'm a suitable person for being able to take wagers in the Garden State or, in Ohio and places like that, which is fine. That's the process that we had agreed to go to. And other people are just saying, fuck it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend $2 million in a couple of years and go through that process. I'm just going to open for business because people right now in New Jersey, Ohio, and every place else, they want games now. And Kalshi, they're like, why go through the trouble of doing it the right way with CFTC? We're just going to start doing it. We'll hire one of the president's kids to be on our advisory board. That's our strategy. And meanwhile, I know a group that they've spent the last 6 years and they've invested millions of dollars of trying to go through the process with CFTC to do exactly what Kalshi and Robinhood and Crypto.com and all those guys are doing right now. And you know what? You know where they got? They haven't taken a single fucking bet. I'm sorry, predictive contract, whatever the hell we're calling them this week. You know what they've gotten? They've gotten a lot of like, well, we like you. You guys are doing things the right way. And it's like, well, that's what we got for $1 million of investment, multi-million-dollar investment, the gold star on top of our thing for good behavior. These businesses, they're going to find a way now because the consumers are like, I want it now. I don't want to drive somewhere to get it. I want it now. And I'm not saying this to be hostile to lawmakers or to regulators. And this isn't part of what I want to do now that I'm like, and it's still true. I'm still not at Prime. So Prime, don't worry. All this should not come back on you with me running my mouth like this. But the regulators, the law, and especially the lawmakers, they got to get with it. And instead, lawmakers are not reading the room well. And instead of trying to make the state markets and being regulated by the states more attractive to innovative companies that can help them expand their market and increase their tax revenue, what they're doing is they're coming to the guys like us, the guys who spent 2 or 3 years on their knees, going through the process, doing things the right way. And they're saying like, we want to fucking tax the shit out of you. We're doubling your taxes. You're paying 15, you're going to go to 30. You're paying 20, which was double from last year from 10. We're going to notch you up to 40. You know what? You're going to see more and more people just hand back their license and say, you know what? I'm going to go do sweepstakes. I'm going to take my chances with that. Maybe they close these federal loopholes. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I don't know. But right now, all I know is I can't take the burden that's being put on me. At the same time, you've got customers are running to these other operations. It's a no-win situation. I get it for the current legal environment, but lawmakers, they got to get off their ass and they got to move faster on this stuff. They got to be more nimble because God knows the industry is far more nimble than they're being right now.
All right. Well, not one, not two, but 3 F-bombs by my count after mention of being the good Catholic. With that gauntlet being thrown down, we will go ahead and wrap up this week's episode. To the audience, whatever the future has in store for loopholes and regulated operators, thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.